Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. I'm the Executive Director of Churches for Middle East Peace. Today is Monday, November 27th, and it is the 52nd day since October 7th. This is also the fourth day of the ceasefire and hostage exchange between Israel and Hamas. And the big news today is that both parties have agreed to extend the ceasefire for an additional 2 days. So that would extend through Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. Just recently, in the last few minutes, it was announced that the fourth round of hostage exchanges had happened. 11 Israeli women and children were released from Gaza after being held by Hamas for 52 days. The numbers as of yesterday, November 26th, were that yesterday's 17 hostages that were held in Gaza had been released, and 39 Palestinian detainees that were held in Israeli prisons were let out. The released hostages yesterday included 4 women and 9 children, in addition to 4 foreign nationals. And the Palestinian detainees who were released yesterday were 39 boys. So since the start yesterday, the numbers were 39 Israelis having been released from being held hostage and 117 Palestinians, in addition to 19 foreign nationals. Today's numbers obviously would be added to those totals. I did watch some of the videos of families being reunited in Israel, and no child or parent or family member or spouse should ever have to go through an ordeal or a trauma like that. And so we have been calling for the release of hostages. We will continue to do so. And we're grateful for that news over the past couple days. And so while there has been some positive progress, there also has been some progress on the humanitarian front. We would be remiss not to call what's happening in Gaza a humanitarian catastrophe. And also the word from Netanyahu's government is that there is every intention for the war to continue once this pause ends. So 2 more days of a pause has been agreed to, but there is every intention that the war on Hamas by the Netanyahu government in Israel would continue. I wanted to give some updates on some of the aid that has been distributed. One of the agreements was that the goal was an increase to 300 humanitarian trucks a day during this ceasefire. And a significant amount of aid has been brought into Gaza, which will make a positive difference. And that's good news. But again, the situation is still catastrophic. There are 1.7 million internally displaced people who have been displaced from their homes in Gaza. You know, it's still important to acknowledge that key service providers, hospitals, water, sanitation facilities, shelters that have been without fuel, many of them are receiving fuel, which is good news as a result of some of the trucks that have entered the last couple of days. On yesterday, the number of trucks that entered in was recorded to be 200, but they said that there were so many trucks that they didn't have total numbers. We also received news yesterday that the first delivered bottled water reached shelters in the north, which had not happened for several weeks. UN agencies and the Palestinian Red Crescent Society distributed 1,062 metric tons of ready-to-eat food to 4 UNRWA shelters in the Jabalia camp. In addition to that, 185 metric tons of tents and blankets and 890 metric tons of bottled water to various sites. So that just gives you the idea of some of the humanitarian assistance that's been allowed in. The Ali Hospital, which we've talked about a lot, the Anglican Hospital, evacuated 17 patients and wounded with their companions from the north to the south in Khan Yunis just in the last day. They still, at the hospital, have enormous shortages and constraints, but Ali does remain operational and is admitting patients. Over the past 3 days, cooking gas has entered Gaza, which is the first time since October 7th. And so that is significant news. OSHA, the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, reported that there are lines at filling stations that are reported to extend for more than 2 kilometers, and that people will often wait in them overnight. And meanwhile, reports indicate that people have been burning doors and window frames to be able to cook. I mentioned the population being displaced, 1.7 million people. That's 80% of the people in Gaza are displaced. The lack of fighting in the ceasefire, has continued to hold, which is good news, but Gaza is still in an electricity blackout. We'll see if that changes as some of the fuel has been allowed to enter into Gaza. I did want to spend a few minutes talking about the situation in the West Bank. So while we have been celebrating the release of these hostages, the West Bank has had a few days that have just been full of bad news. Sorry, that's not a very technical term, but on the 25th and 26th, so Saturday and Sunday, and these reports are very specific. Israeli forces shot and killed 7 Palestinians, including 4 children, during operations. The deadliest incident lasted 10 hours and took place in Jenin's refugee camp and resulted in 5 Palestinians being killed. The operation involved armed clashes with Palestinians, airstrikes, resulting in extensive infrastructure and residential damage. According to medical sources, during the operation, Israeli forces impeded the work of paramedics, denied access to 2 hospitals, and arrested 2 people who were injured in one of the hospitals. Another Palestinian boy was killed by Israeli forces in Al-Baria, which is near Ramallah, during stone-throwing confrontations. Another Palestinian man was killed inside a vehicle during an operation that was carried out by Israeli forces near Nablus. No Israeli casualties were reported. Since October 7th, 222 Palestinians, including 58 children, have been killed by Israeli forces. And an additional 8 Palestinians, including 1 child, have been killed by settlers, including in East Jerusalem, and 4 Israelis have been killed in attacks that were done by Palestinians. Here's what I think is important to understand by this. According to OSHA, 66% of these 222 fatalities that have happened since October 7th have occurred from confrontations that followed Israeli search and arrest operations. So that means Israeli military is coming into areas within the West Bank to arrest someone or to search or to do some type of military operation. And that's when these deaths are occurring. So this is not just a violent clash where Palestinians are being killed. This is not, this idea of a Palestinian terrorist attack. That's not what's happening. These are Israeli search and arrest operations. And so I thought that was an important note for us to understand. 7% have been killed while attacking or allegedly attacking Israeli forces or settlers. 2% have been killed in settler attacks against Palestinians, and 1% during punitive demolitions. On November 25th, 3 settler attacks resulted in damage to property and injuries. And since October 7th, there have been a reported 284 settler attacks against Palestinians. We have heard that since everything began on October 7th, and since Israel has responded and has been bombing Gaza, settlers in the West Bank have been sending notes. We've heard this directly from Palestinian villages, threatening to attack. And so many villagers won't leave. And there are some really incredibly courageous Israelis who are accompanying Palestinians so that Palestinians are able to travel out of their villages because they don't feel safe to do so because of these increases in settler attacks. And so this reflects a daily average of 6 incidents a day of settler attacks on Palestinians, where that average was 3 a day prior to October 7th. Over 1/3 of these incidents included threats with firearms, including shootings, and half of the incidents, or nearly half of the incidents, Israeli forces were either accompanying or actively supporting their attackers, supporting Israeli settlers. The situation in the West Bank is escalating. We've talked to our friends there. One of the things that's happening this week, please pray for this. We have 3 guests that are Palestinian Christians who have just arrived in the United States that are here to call on President Biden for a ceasefire. And we are following their lead. They are friends and they are partners. We're having a service tomorrow. Today is Monday, the 27th. Tomorrow, the 28th, we're having a service here in Washington, D.C. That's another prayer vigil. Tomorrow, we're having another meeting with the White House calling for a ceasefire and elevating the voices of Christians from Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. And so as Christmas approaches and as the Advent season begins, please be calling your members of Congress. Join us in our Advent chains, our Advent prayers. We have many opportunities for you to engage and to take action. And so we will not give up in calling for a ceasefire and in an end to the death of all civilians as we seek peace together.